This week on Theater Talk.
Why is your Three Sisters, this one at CSE, different from other Three Sisters?
I think that play is so personal that almost anybody who does it, it's automatically going to be distinctive. Because it's as personal a play as it's not like any other play.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Our guest is one of the most hardworking and revered artists in the theater. He's an actor on stage, screen, and television, a director, an artistic director, and wears so many more hats. But right now he's very busy as a director. Austin Pendleton is directing The Three Sisters, a very powerful production at the Classic Stage Company. And he's got a new play coming to Broadway, Detroit, that he's doing with Steppenwolf. Austin, welcome to Theater Talk.
You're not wearing a hat today,
No.
despite all the hats that you normally wear. I must ask you about Chekhov, though, because you look Chekhovian.
Oh, well.
You really do. You look like somebody who's just come out of an estate outside of Moscow somewhere.
Yeah.
But no, have you always been sort of in that Chekhov kind of?
I've done a lot of Chekhov, both as an actor and a director. Yeah, I was in Three Sisters twice some years ago.
You were the Baron, right?
I was the Baron,
Yeah,
first at
yeah.
Williamstown and then at
Yeah.
the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And then I've directed it 25 years ago at Steppenwolf, and now I'm directing it here.
Why is your Three Sisters, this one at CSE, different from other Three Sisters? How is it different?
It's not consciously different.
No.
You know what I mean? I think that play, how should I put this? I think that play is so personal that almost anybody who does it, it's automatically going to be distinctive. Because it's as personal a play as it's not like any other play, including any other Chekhov play, really. And it's people who work a lot in theater really tend to want to work on that play. And I've seen a whole lot of really striking productions, like the Lee Strasberg one in the 60s I saw.
Oh, a famous one.
2 or 3 times with Kim Stanley and Geraldine Page. And
So when you work with the
and that was
actors,
utterly
yeah.
different from this, but it was because those people were very different
Right.
from these people.
What is the, from your perspective as the director, the best way to approach Chekhov? Because you know, when it's not done well, it can be incredibly boring.
It can be bad, yeah.
I mean, what's the pitfall there, and how does one avoid that?
If you keep looking, every moment in the play moves the story forward. And if you find out the way in which each moment moves the story forward, you have a shot at it. And a lot of these different productions that I've just referred to, that I was either in or that I saw, like Kim Stanley, or one that the Moscow Art Theater brought in 1965, and a number of others over the years. In one way or another, the ones that have worked are the ones where you always felt the forward movement of the story. That even though the characters, it's sort of like O'Neill, it's not at all like O'Neill, but it's like O'Neill in that the characters repeat themselves a lot.
Right.
But every time they do, it's a different moment, that they're further along in the development of the story. So that then finally, when you get to the end of the story, which is overwhelming,
Yes, yes.
if you've just been, the audience becomes aware that it's actually been developing toward that. Every moment, just like in a thriller.
Yeah.
Everything is actually moving it forward, and you have to keep redefining it until you find the way in which that happens.
I agree with you completely of that, because I think it's often overlooked in Chekhov. He was such a skilled man of the theater. There's always dramatic thrust
Yes,
in all of
exactly.
the plays, but it's not always apparent.
And his whole famous thing about what he wanted to do in playwriting, and he's actually the first one who ever really, really did this, is actually, he said, if you just watch people having dinner, they're only having dinner, that's all they're doing, but their lives are moving forward. Their lives are falling apart, their lives are coming together and moving to a new place, but they're just having dinner.
Yeah.
He decided that was the way he was going to write plays, was to show that.
You essentially do this production in the round, well, CSE, it's...
Yeah, in the three-sided.
Yeah, so you have, for instance, Louis Zorich coming in as the funny old doctor, but he's not doing a star turn as a funny old doctor. You're right, it advances
You would
the
kill
plot.
a Chekhov play if you had star turns on
Yeah.
it. I mean,
Yes, that's right. And it tends to keep that from happening. Like the wonderful Mike Nichols production of Uncle Vanya in 1973 or something. That when I directed a lot of these same people in Uncle Vanya at CSC 2 years ago, and I ran into Mike when the play was running, and I said, look, I stole. There are two key moments. I just stole outright. You could take me to arbitration for this. They were just unforgettable. There was a moment that is very hard to describe, but it involved George C. Scott and Liz Wilson. And I didn't do exactly but the way he shaped that moment was as beautiful as anything I've ever seen. And but again, this is a thing that Mike does all the time. He does it in Chekhov as well as in Neil Simon and anybody else. He shapes the moments so you know how the story is moving forward, and you know what to watch for, and that always creates suspense, and that's what keeps an evening, no matter what the play is,
alive. Yeah.
from either being engaging to the audience or not, if they just simply wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? You've worked with some of the great directors, and you are now quite an established director yourself. Can you give us a sense of some of the ones you worked for and what they were like? Lee Strasberg, for example.
I never worked with him.
You never worked with him?
I didn't even really know him. I once auditioned for him to come to the Actors Studio, but I was turned down.
Sorry, then Jerome Robbins?
Yeah, I worked. The first two shows I was in New York were both directed by Jerome Robbins, which were Odad and Fiddler on the Roof.
And what do you think you observed, saw, and have been influenced by working with someone like Robbins?
Well, and then after him, I worked with Alan Arkin, and then with Mike Nichols in Little Foxes.
Right.
And these people, they're brilliant, but they're into telling the story. I remember there was this one little scene in Fiddler on the Roof when the family's preparing for the Sabbath. This little scene just to establish the characters and the family relationship. One evening in June of 1964, Jerry spent 6 hours staging and restaging that scene.
How long did the scene last?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
And just to make it utterly clear, effortlessly clear and in focus without making points, through the behavior, what all these family relationships were. He would stage it, he would be unhappy with it. He would stage it again. This went on for hours and hours and hours and hours. And finally, it was crystal clear. And it would, and then after that, he never restaged it again.
Because he had it, yeah.
Yeah, but I remember taking that in. And at that time, I had no idea I'd ever be a director or anything, but I thought, whoa.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying then is that it's just this laser-like focus on the details.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's all about movement. I don't just mean the movement of people around the stage, but the inner movement of the scene, how people relate to each other and how that can be put in focus.
How long did it take you to learn this as a director? You can see it, but then you sort of have to do it, right, before you can figure it out yourself.
I used to, when I first began to direct, which was a few years after that, I began to direct up at Williamstown under the guidance of Nikos Sakharopoulos, who was the guy at Williamstown for so many years. The first few shows I directed at Williamstown, I had it all blocked out in my mind. I had all the moves all worked out for every scene. Then about a year after that, or a couple years after I started, I was directing a show at the Long Wharf, and I was trying to get together the production in all kinds of ways. I didn't have time to pre-block it. And I arrived at the rehearsal where that would happen, just terrified. I thought, now it's going to be revealed that I don't know anything.
You're a fraud.
Yeah, right. That moment has come, And suddenly I was blocking it more expressively than I'd ever blocked anything.
And you were really working.
And then I remembered that's what Jerry did. He never had written anything down.
It was the experimenting in real time.
Yes. It's like working with material, and the material is the actors, and the actors in the play interacting, and you begin to see things. The important thing is how you work with the designer, the set designer before that. I think it was Kazan who used to say 80% of directing is casting, and another 18% is the ground plan. Because you have to have a ground plan where the movement will automatically be expressive of the story.
Right.
And if it's not, there's no way around it.
Yeah.
So in other words, with a designer, you talk and talk and talk, and if the designer is good, like this guy, like Walt Spangler, he then says, okay, how about this? That's how you work with actors too. You don't tell them how to do it. As an actor, I know that.
Is the best approach to allow them to range, and then you're the person who pulls it back, puts it into focus?
Yes, that's one thing. But before you do that, you spend a certain amount of time around the table, going through the scenes and talking about them. And you also, then when you get it on its feet, you spend a lot of time talking. To go back to before, you talk about, what is this scene about? What does this scene, what's the event? That's a phrase from Lee Strasberg. Whom I never knew, but that's a phrase from him. What's the event in this scene that moves the story forward? How are things different at the end of this scene than they were at the beginning between the characters? And you talk a lot about that, and they ask questions about it, and they have their own ideas about it. But you get a communal idea of what needs to take place in the scene. And then once you get that established, then you give them free rein. Or they take it. You don't give it to them. That's sort of paternalistic. And that can go on for quite a while. In fact, it should. And then gradually you say, don't do that, but maybe do this. One of the great directors I ever worked with as an actor was Dan Sullivan. And I always tell my acting class this story. I did a show with him. This is his early years, his frontier days in the regional theaters. I was doing a show that he directed by Arthur Miller. It was a musical by Arthur Miller.
I mean, what was it called?
It was called Up from Paradise. It's from that play that he wrote about creation of the world.
That's right.
It's a lovely musical. And I was playing Adam. It's Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Lucifer and God are the characters. It's delicious. But anyway, so I would do things, and Dan would say at rehearsal the next day about the performance the night before. He would say, Austin, you know that moment of whatever? And I'd say, yeah. He said, that thing you're doing? I'd say, yeah. He said, don't do that. And I would say, well, what do you want me to do? I said, anything but that.
Oh, my.
No, but that's brilliant direction, because he's saying, if I may put words into his mouth, he's saying, that's just a habit that you're doing there. Just do something else, and it'll shake things up. It'll open up things. Is what he was actually. But he doesn't explain what it means. He just says, "Don't do that." And at first I thought, what's he talking about? And then I pretty quickly began to realize, wait a minute. There's a lot of new stuff happening here. Now, see, that's a terrific way. That's one way of directing very well.
Is that a question of knowing your actors so well that you can see when they're just falling back on the tricks they have in their case?
Yes, and as no less than Laurence Olivier once said when accused by a interviewer about his mannerisms, he said, "Dear boy, sometime you try going on stage without your mannerisms." It's very primal. It's not, it's just, you're out there. You got to protect yourself somehow.
Thinking about that, are there Austin Pendleton tics and tricks that you fall back on?
I'm afraid there are, yes.
And that you have to consciously...
They have been alluded to in many places.
For example, I mean, something specific that you find yourself doing when you're not sure what you should be doing?
Oh, God, 100 of them.
Like the way you hold your hand or the way you walk or something?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And directors will... What a director usually tries to do, and what I try to do, it's not like you say, well, every once in a while you say, don't do that. Although Dan would never say what not to do. He would say, whatever you did last night, don't do that. And he wasn't really talking about a mannerism. He would be talking more about an approach to a moment. Like he would be, I think, in effect saying, that approach is too easy for you. Just try something else.
An actor would have
That's
to have
brilliant direction of an actor. It really is. Because it gives you some free rein, but yet it puts you in a more productive direction for the script,
Right.
And see, acting is ultimately about ownership. The actors have to own what they do. It has to somehow, no matter how much you tell them, what the actors do finally has to come from them, or it's not going to have that extra kind of life.
It has to be their reality in the character,
Yes.
not imposed by a director.
That's right. There shouldn't ultimately be a moment that someone's only doing because they were told to do it.
They were told to do it.
I mean, sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to say you have to do this.
Right.
But you try to keep that to a minimum. And when you do give a direction like that, you try to make it something that will kind of liberate them or kind of move in on them. You try to find a thing. It's like, look, I have to tell you to do this. You try to put it in such a way that they'll understand that in a way that then, even though it's imposed on them, they can have ownership.
Right.
But what you usually want to do is just go over and over again what the moment is about and see what they come up with.
Likely then the actors in Three Sisters like Sarsgaard and
Yes, and Maggie Gyllenhaal and Jessica Hecht.
Wonderful.
Love
Juliet Rylance
Yes,
and Marin
she did.
Ireland and Louis Zorich and on and on.
on and on. Well, that they love
And
working.
Josh Hamilton.
Exactly. That someone like Josh Hamilton loves coming to work with you, I would think, because you work that way, that you are asking them to own every moment and make Chekhov their own rather than in a movie when that's not so much the case.
But a good director in a movie does the same thing.
You said that did you say that you learned 80% of movie acting from Otto Preminger?
I did.
Now, why is that?
Well, I was in a film of his that was a disaster.
Yes,
Which one was that?
Skidoo.
Oh, yeah. Skidoo.
But Skidoo is such a disaster that it sort of came out the other side and became a cult favorite. Why, I don't really know. So we were making Skidoo, which was, as I say, was a disaster and became a cult favorite over the years. I don't know why. But anyway, and a lot of the scenes I had were with Jackie Gleason. And Jackie was really depressed.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't realize this. I had not realized this before this, but he had real problems with depression. It was a burden to him. He was a very sweet man.
Yeah.
Very, very sweet man.
Quite a heavy drinker, though, too.
Yeah, but which came first, the chicken
Yeah,
or the egg? You just don't know.
Yeah.
And so he didn't want to come out of his trailer to rehearse the scenes. And they were rather long scenes. So when we would be rehearsing it, Otto would just work with me. And he would, it was the first film I did. And he would tell me, he'd seen me in the theater, and he would say, you know, every take is like opening night. You have to be that focused. And then he would just describe, he would talk a lot about the simplicity of the behavior that he wanted.
So he was paring
you
down to...
And then I thought, it began to occur to me, well, this would go for the theater too, wouldn't it? You know, that would work in the theater. And he'd say, yeah. And then when and he lived in New York, so then after the film was over, he would come to see a lot of the plays I was in. He was always very, but he was, he had his temper, as we all know.
Famously, yeah.
Yeah, but he really knew, and when you would see a whole lot of his films, like I saw at the Film Forum a couple years ago, it was pretty consistent. I mean, if he didn't totally terrify or freeze an actor up.
Right.
The work, including from some very florid personalities, would be very simple and to the point and honest, and he was into talking and listening.
How did he solve the Jackie Gleason problem, though? How do you solve a problem when an actor is in that position?
He just respected it.
He wasn't tyrannical.
He was very careful of it. He was very careful of Jackie's feelings. And then we would have scenes that went on for pages, which are unusual, of course, in a movie. But and so Jackie would come out and he would say, "Okay, let's just film the first 6 lines, and then we'll do the next 6 lines," because he just couldn't remember lines.
Smart.
And so Otto would say, "Fine," and he was a good actor, Jackie. So
Yeah.
He shepherded him through it. What he didn't like is if people pulled stuff on him. If he saw that someone was honestly in trouble, I was honestly in trouble because I was terrified. I mean, I'd never been in a movie. Also, how shall I say, this movie clearly wasn't working. You know, and it was that momentous spring of 1968, before either of you were born, and right in the middle of shooting the assassination of Martin Luther King happened, and that was when LBJ had just withdrawn from the race, and it was that there hasn't been a spring like that before or since, exactly like that. Just so at the end, and we shot just about everything on the Paramount lot. And at the end of the day, he would invite a few of us to his office on the Paramount lot, and he would pour the vodka. And we would talk politics for 2 hours into the evening on frequent nights.
Just one last bit on acting. We were just talking about Gleason for a moment. When you're the very well-known teacher of actors at HB Studios, directing them as well, of course. When an actor gets in trouble, what's generally behind that, and how do you get your students out of it and someone you're directing out of it?
The only important thing to remember about that is it's different with everybody. You can't apply a solution you tried with somebody else to somebody else.
Right.
That's just the important thing. You just try to hear them out.
Yeah.
Kazan, I think, used to be a genius at that.
What would he do?
He would go on long walks. He would listen to them.
I had heard that he would put his arm around your shoulder and take you around the block and talk.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I never actually was in anything he directed, to my regret. But I knew him, and he would ask you a question that you wouldn't have expected him to ask you, and then you would find yourself pouring out your deepest heart and soul.
And that was the clay for him.
Yeah,
too.
right. Yeah, right. He just had an uncanny sense of that.
And does tyranny ever work as a director? I mean, there are famous tyrannical directors. Does that ever have to be one of the colors that you in your director's rainbow?
I'm not good at it. You have to be good at it. Some people are truly good at it, and I mean that. They know the use of it, and they know the power of it, and they know the value of it, and they know how to do it.
Instilling fear.
Yeah, and that can be. I mean, I've worked with directors like that, and if they know what they're doing with that, it can be extraordinary. It's hard, but you do get to some place. There was a touch of that with Jerry Robbins.
Yeah, famously.
But he that was only one thing. He was also very supportive and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't strike me as being a terror in the.
Well, when I try it, I'm not good at it. I mean, and it's like they can smell it when you're not good at it. You know what I mean? All it does is create tension.
That's right. Okay.
When it's properly used, it releases tension.
Right. That's right.
You know?
Fascinating. I just want to say you've got a new play coming to Broadway called Detroit.
It's a play by Lisa Damour. We did it at Steppenwolf last fall.
Got a rave from Charles Isherwood in the New York Times. And can you just tell us quickly what that's about so people
about two
whet their
couples in a first-ring suburb of a Midwestern American city. It's not necessarily Detroit, but one that is in trouble.
Yeah.
And everything's falling apart. The houses are literally falling apart, and their lives are falling apart. And it's very funny, and it's very disturbing. And she's the real article as a writer, Lisa Damour.
On Broadway in the fall?
Yep.
And the Austin Pendleton project.
Oh, that's that thing where they're going around and
making a movie about you.
These two,
What do you mean that's that thing? Aren't you aware that the cameras are following
these
you?
two guys are so self-effacing.
That's the
David
problem.
Holmes and Gene Gallerano. They're both these good, and they started to do this like a couple of years ago, and I'm only subliminally aware of it. But they came to Chicago, and they had their cameras at rehearsals for Detroit. They interviewed the actors of that.
And they're talking to every big actor in the business about you.
About you.
To Meryl Streep
And on and on and on.
Ethan Hawke and Phil Hoffman.
Yeah.
And,
I don't know. Just when you think...
I find out about these things after they've done it.
Right, well, that's good.
I don't know, just when you think a documentary filmmaker is self-effacing, that's when you have to get wary, because that's when they catch you.
Well, yeah, but in other words, these guys are good. And they've talked to Olympia and Louis and all that. And I don't like to think about it because, I'm happy. Who wouldn't be happy they're doing it? But I don't like to think about it because you get all,
I hope they do catch a moment where you're having to fake tyranny in the rehearsal hall. I'd love to see
I'm
that.
sure if they stick around long enough, it always happens sooner or later. There's sooner or later, and they'll get it. And then that'll be it for my career. Yeah, right.
No. Well, Austin Pendleton, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you about directing and acting. And don't miss the Three Sisters at the Classic Stage.
Can I say
Company.
one other person who's
sure,
in Three Sisters? Roberta Maxwell.
Oh, yeah. She's fantastic.
She plays the old servant. Now, Roberta Maxwell is nowhere near the age of the servant in the play, but I've known her all my adult life. The only other time I ever directed her was at Longwharf in 1973 in Miss Julie with Christopher Walken.
Oh, wow.
And she was, it was reviewed as being the definitive Miss Julie, both her and him. And now she's playing Anfisa, the old servant, which is a powerful role, but not a large role.
No.
But she's great.
And you suddenly see these plays were written for that. These parts were all meant to be played by great actors.
Right.
And when you have one in a part like that, you suddenly see what that kind of thinking is all about.
Yeah. Well, it just reminds me of what you said about Jerry Robbins, too. Chekhov's writing, that part may be small, but the attention to the detail of that part is so intense, so rich, that you have to have a real actor, a great actor doing it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You can see this, what we're talking about, you can see on stage at CSC, The Three Sisters, directed by Austin Pendleton, and a big hit on Broadway coming in the fall called Detroit. He's also directing it.
From your mouth to God's ear.
And are you going to be acting again on Broadway, or are you more directing now?
Well, there's no pattern. Whatever somebody asks me to do, I do. You know.
That's showbiz.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Austin Pendleton, thanks a lot. It's been fascinating.
Thank you
Pleasure.
so much.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.